Hello, dear students. I am Mukesh Kumar Meena, Assistant Professor in English, SPNK's Government PG College, Dosa. Today, we will discuss the poem London by William Blake. You know that William Blake was a major transitional poet. He is considered as a precursor to Romanticism, and he is also the greatest uh, visionary poet in English. He was born in 1757 and died in 1827. He is chiefly regarded as a visionary poet. London is a short poem, but it has great thoughts of William Blake content in it. Now I am going to read the poem. I wandered through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forced manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the helpless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. In this poem, London, Blake decries the three great evils of society: callousness of society, as exemplified by the chimney sweeper's miserable life, the adversity of war, as expressed in the case of the soldier, and lust, represented in the malpractice of harlotry that looms large as a threat to the purity of marriage and the happiness of the offspring. Blake is not the only poet who laments the collapse of humanity in London. Later, Wordsworth, in his London 1802, wishes Milton were living in that period to redeem England from the deterioration it has undergone. T.S. Eliot has portrayed the cultural collapse of London as well as the whole world in his The West End. In this poem, London, William Blake attacks the hollowness of society and the helplessness of the church. The speaker in the poem passes through the streets of London, and along the streets which stand by river Thames, which flows freely, he notices the face of his fellow men that pass by him and finds their countenance discolored by feebleness. He finds in the cries of children and men the replica of men's own sinful deeds. He also notices that men are fettered by the chains they have forced for themselves. It is they who have invented the society which now oppresses them. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has escaped the curse man has brought upon himself. The poet hears the cries of the chimney sweepers, which appall the helpless church, the sighs of the dying soldier whose blood drips down the palace walls are audible to the poet. At midnight, the curses of the young harlots are heard in the streets, and this plagues and spoils the holy tie between the wife and husband in their marital life. It becomes also curse for the young child that is born either from the marriage or from the adultery. In the background, we see the shadow of Urizen. His sign is the manacles. Man invented this god in whose name church and state practice their tyranny and abuse us, bringing misery to all. Black expresses his ideas on the church, society, and man in this poem. Many of the poems of Blake are static when each of them is taken as an entity in itself. In London, though we may take the poem as an isolated specimen, we can sense a progression in terms of both thought and feeling. It moves from the chartered streets to the Thames and to the Thames that flows mm, according to its own sweet will, and thereon to the midnight street. Blake has already given us the critical birth of a Londoner in infant sorrow. There the boy is born into a dangerous world and struggles in vain to escape from this world. But eventually he has come to his full size in this poem where the vices of society welcome him. The poet notices woe and suffering in the faces of the learners instead of pleasure and joy. More than an isolated case of London, the poem reveals the reality of society as a whole. The serious and outraged tone of the poem culminates in the exposition of a truth that harlotry changes the married life into a death carriage. Posterity is cursed by the hereditary sin of adultery and lawless marital relationship. The posterity of London, as is shown in Blake's London, hails from or descends from loveless married life, and they will become the fallen progeny carrying the sinful burden of their predecessors' adulterous and sinful life. Blake's tragic appreciation of the restrictions which imprison and kill the living spirit was no purely personal thing. It was his criticism of society and the whole trend of contemporary civilization. His compassionate heart was outraged and wounded by the sufferings which society inflicts on its humbler members, on its humbler members, and by the waste of human material. It seems indispensable to the efficient operation of rules and laws. In London, he gives his own view of that chartered liberty on which his countrymen prided themselves and exposes the indisputable ugly facts. The child, chimney sweeper, the soldier, the harlot are Blake's type of the oppressed, characteristic victims of a system based not on brotherhood but on fear. Each in his own way shows up shams on which society thrives. The chimney sweeper's condemned life is supported by the churches. The soldier's death is demanded by the court, and the harlot's calling is forced on her by the marriage laws. The contrasts between the truth and pretense, between natural happiness and unnatural repression, are stressed by Blake in these three examples. And through them, we see the anguish in which he faced the social questions of his time. Rather than a poem of protest, London is also a picture of a mental state of the inhabitants of London. The woe and weariness of the dwellers of London strike the note of pessimism. The London society, the London society is corrupt. It is the corruption of civilization by the power of reason, whose self-imposed manacles have restricted every spontaneous joy. The street cries of chimney sweepers loudly accuse the church, and the death sighs of the soldier stain the state. Love itself, the fundamental human virtue, is negated, and this negation degenerates the Holy Mary's bed, the very institution basic to society, into a blighted hearse. Thanks for listening.